Todd and I both went to Brown University, but we didn't really know each other very well there. We knew of each other, and we probably ended up at the same party or same dorm room a couple of times. But we both came to New York after college. I guess it was the mid to late 80s, and it was a kind of insane time. New York was the New York of legend. It was kind of lawless, but there was an intense feeling that you could really achieve anything creatively that you wanted to. We re-met each other, and with a third friend, Barry Ellsworth, we started a company called Apparatus Productions, whose intention was to make short films. Around that time, Todd was finishing his first film, although I think he made a lot of Super 8 movies as a child and a teenager, but his first film of note, which was called Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story. So he was editing it. I'd had a little bit of experience as, in an editing room. He was editing it on film, of course, because that's all there was. And I worked with him a little bit in the edit and helped him with the sound mix and things like that. So I got to see, before it was quite finished, the extraordinary movie that Superstar, the Karen Carpenter story was. But when I saw that film, I really thought to myself, okay, this is everything that I want to do as a film producer. It's provocative, it's funny, it's incredibly moving, and it's entertaining. And I just thought, I need to make sure that the next one we do together. So we then did Poison, which went off to the Sundance Film Festival, and it won the Grand Jury Prize. And then we started talking about the next one. And the next one was Safe. Safe was very different from Poison in the sense that the budget was considerably bigger. We were financing it in a more sort of traditional indie film way, and we were looking to cast it at a higher level so that we could make those pre-sales and get the equity involved. We were putting together a production at a much bigger level than any of us had ever done before. Big push. I remember it was very important to Todd that the film be set in the late 80s. It had something to do with this sort of intense consumerism that was just becoming more and more a part of that decade, of what that decade was. And even from a distance of 4 or 5 years, you could look back and see that. Because Carol's world was so much about stuff and about what she acquired. Oh my God. That was her whole life. It just seemed like the perfect backdrop. Julianne, at that time, was represented by the William Morris Company and by one agent in particular named Frank Frateroli. And Todd had pretty much decided that he wanted the role of Carol to be played by one of the actors who was in Poison. She ended up playing Linda in Safe. And Frank Frateroli called me up and said, you have got to see this one client of mine, Julianne Moore. She just was in The Hand That Rocks the Cradle, and she's about to come out in Altman's film Shortcuts. So we arranged to meet with her, and of course her agent said the thing that agents always say is, you can't ask her to read. You can meet with her, but you can't ask her to read. So she came in to meet with us, and she told me later that she was just terrified. She wanted the part so badly. And we sat down with her. We exchanged pleasantries. We actually had a kid there with a video camera. And after a few minutes, Todd said, would you mind reading a scene? And she said, no, of course not.
Who told you to go to this?
No, I just, Al sent her myself for it.
So you think this is what you've been, why you've been sick? Because of bug spray or?
No, I just... I don't know why.
And she was extraordinary. And it was really just one of those, eureka moments of okay, now no one else can play this part.
Excuse me, are you Carol?
Yes.
Hi, I'm Susan. I work with Claire. We've spoken on the phone.
Hi.
We're so glad that you made it.
Todd and I went and visited. He went and visited quite a few on his own, but we went to a couple of, just the two of us, of these communities, they do exist, these communities, or at least they existed. I assume they still exist, where people really have come together because they cannot live in the world as it is. And there's so many different sides to that. Are they the canaries in the coal mine? Is it that we're not seeing what's right in front of us? And now, 20 years later, when statistically there's more autism, for example, like 1,000 times more, or, people who are allergic to everything under the sun and can't go on an airplane when they open up their packets of peanuts. I mean, all of that stuff is just even way more so than it was when we made the film, but it was there then. And should we just look at those people as the first in a series of intense wake-up calls?
I've stopped reading the papers. I've stopped watching the news on TV. I've heard the media gloom and doom, and I've seen their fatalistic, negative attitude, and I finally realized once and for all, I don't need it.
Or is there another side of it? When Peter Dunning says, I've stopped reading the newspaper, I've stopped watching the news, it's like, oh, there's Sarah Palin. It's kind of amazing in that sense, too. I'm going to shut the world out because information is unhealthy.
That devastating, that destructive.
I think that's what made people so angry at the film, the people who got angry, because essentially they were saying, well, I don't know what I'm supposed to feel. I don't know if I'm supposed to, if I'm supposed to be, happy that Carol's there at the end, if it's a cult. I don't know if he's a good character or a bad character. I don't know, and I need to, this isn't fair. But that's part of the reason why the movie doesn't leave you. And I defy anyone to see it and not feel affected by it days and days later. What's inextricable from that period of the late 80s, early 90s is HIV, because New York was in the grips of a terrible crisis, and both Todd and I were members of ACT UP, and we were really in it, in the sense we both had so many friends, many of them mutual, who were dealing with it in some way, shape, or form. It was not uncommon often to just, to just say, oh, what happened to so-and-so? And somebody, oh, you didn't hear? I mean, it was that quick, and people you'd hear that someone got sick, and then 2 weeks later you'd hear that they were gone. Or what was almost even worse is these families would swoop in, from the Midwest or the South and take these guys away, and then you'd never see them again. And they would die, out, with all due respect, in the middle of nowhere, without their friends around, without their boyfriend, their lover, the person that meant the most to them around. And it was just, it was constant, and it lent this intense sense of urgency to everything we did, like this idea that if you don't tell your story now, you're not going to be able to tell it. Poison, with its opening legend, the whole world is dying of panicky fright, obviously was addressing that in some ways kind of head on. And also with the black and white horror story, where the doctor develops a disease and becomes an outcast, et cetera, et cetera. So that's kind of clear. In Safe, we talked a lot about this whole notion of what was sort of sweeping through the gay and lesbian community was, how can you gain some sense of control over this horrible scourge? This notion that you could somehow control what happened to you. And is your illness a reflection of you? Is it a reflection of what's happening in society at large? All of those ideas of what does sickness actually mean were things that we were talking about and grappling with. This notion that, if you got ill, it was your own fault, all of that. So he wanted to make a movie that confronted those things, but not in a way that honestly was dated, but in a way that had a timelessness. And the film came under a lot of attack from the gay and lesbian community as a result. There was a lot of why isn't it about AIDS? Why is it about a woman? Why is it about a white woman? But, the notion that you could make a movie that sort of took on the crisis, but really kind of delved into it and it exploded it kind of back out with an incredible amount of resonance, was to give the gay and lesbian community a break, who were dealing with it on a daily basis. It was really, they wanted something that was much, much more literal. The whole new queer cinema thing, I think now when it gets discussed, it doesn't really ever get discussed in the context of the HIV crisis in the way that really just adds more layers to what was really going on. Back then, it was all about the whole notion of positive images, and there was a lot of talk about that. When I made the film Swoon, for example, with Tom Kalin, the film came under a tremendous amount of attack from the gay and lesbian community for depicting gay serial killers. And this whole idea that essentially was being said was, when our community is under such attack anyway, how dare you represent us on a screen in a way that isn't absolutely positive? And of course, the answer to that is, well, what the fuck is positive? I mean, you know, your idea of what a positive image is could be a million miles away from mine. And why does there have to be one? So it was a very, very interesting time in that sense. But there was also a lot of, like, you know, the gay and lesbian community was as guilty as any other, community that, in silencing some of its members. And it was very difficult. It was very contentious. I remember when it played at the Sundance Film Festival. Jeff Gilmore, who ran the festival at the time, was a huge fan of the movie. They had a slot at that time that was right smack in the middle of the festival. That was a very prestigious slot. And I have to say the reception was pretty mixed. And I remember standing outside and seeing certain critics come out who really, who I knew and who knew me, who either avoided me or, didn't make eye contact. And I thought, uh-oh. I mean, ironically, a lot of those critics put the film on their 10 best list some point down the line, maybe not that year. And there was this sort of general feeling like that people didn't get it, that people weren't quite sure what to make of it. But by the end of the 90s, it had found its place in the canon.
Oh my God. Paul, do you have a Kleenex?
It was one of those movies that if every person who said to me, well, I knew when I saw it, I knew when I saw it that it was fantastic. If every one of those people really had known that or had actually really seen it in the theater, the movie would have made money. I remember that Halloween, there were a few really cool people who went as Lester. So it was definitely gathering steam. And maybe because it was pre-internet, it took a while for people, like-minded people, to find each other and say, hey, this, you know what? This is really something. This movie, it's not only a good movie, it's new, and it has an originality that's kind of ahead of its time. Todd really made me understand what the term mise-en-scène meant. Because now what I realize it means being able to control every facet of the frame. I've worked with a lot of directors now. I've made something like 80 films, and I've worked with a lot of great directors. But it's very rare to find a director who really understands every aspect of that experience, so that it's about the great performance, it's about the shot, it's about the color, the palette, it's about, that one tiny thing here, all of that kind of adding up to an emotional experience, and to the experience that the director wants you to have. And there's that sensation that you feel, I feel, when you sit down in a movie and you feel like you're in safe hands and that you're going to have an experience. And there was an element of that in all of Todd's very early work. And obviously, one of the wonderful things about Poison was that it was 3 completely different kinds of narratives. So visually, they were very drastically different. And sure, we were dealing with pretty limited means, but he still had that same ability, even on those limited means, to affect that kind of experience. As he's gotten more experience, I think his craft has gotten extraordinary. so that his ability to say, like, oh, here's this whole other layer I can add through the camera, through visual means, through, new tools like CGI or what have you, can make those experiences even richer. But if you went back, to 1992 or whenever Poison came out and said, all right, Todd, make 5 movies like right in a row now, they'd still have that thing, that ability to completely affect your experience.